Welcome, everybody, to our front porch conversation here at First Unitarian Church of Dallas. We're so glad that we have a small gathering as we are trying to get things rolling here at the church. This is actually our second front porch conversation, but the first with anybody in the audience. So we welcome Justine Fonte. We're so glad that you are here with us.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, I'm Reverend Daniel Cantor. I'm senior minister of the church, and we are so glad to collaborate with WISE, the organization that really came out of this church, Wholly Informed Sexual Education, Sexuality Education. It was brought Justine to Dallas for a couple days, and we're just glad to have the ability to have this conversation with you and with our friends here. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Today we welcome you to Texas. I know you've been here for a couple days. You went to the fair and you ate a lot of bad food or something.
I would call it sometimes food.
Okay.
Sometimes food.
That's sweet. You've come to a state where you have fewer rights over your body being here. So let's just acknowledge that you've crossed the border.
I have,
And we appreciate you coming to be in the resistance with us.
Thank you.
On what's happening in our state, and I think we'll get to some of that maybe a little bit later. Justine has a degree from the University of California, San Diego, bachelor's degree in psychology. You're a tennis player. You have a master's in education from the University of Hawaii and a master's in public health in sexuality from Columbia University. Add some things to your intro. What would you say who you are? I know you were born into a Filipino family here in California.
Yeah.
And tell us more about who you are, just a big picture.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. To add to that, I was raised Filipino Catholic. I joke that is a double whammy of restrictions, not just from the Catholic Church and how they had really restricted a lot of, or still do, around reproductive rights, but the Filipino aspect is very draconian and almost synonymous with Catholicism. And so my upbringing was very much void of sexuality education, and now that it's exactly what my career is focused on. So when people ask, how did you get here into this job? And I said, 9 years of Catholic school. That's how, yeah. So that's a huge part of who I am. I'm also a big foodie, so I have my list of places I want to stop by while I'm in Dallas to eat. Torchy's tacos I'm very looking forward to. I miss it. But those are, the two main things, a Filipina, a feminist, and a foodie. That's what my email signature says, at least.
Very good. And your pronouns are she, they, and my pronouns are he, him, just so we get that out in the open. Yeah. So good. Tell us what you do. Can you summarize what you do in the world in a couple of paragraphs or a couple thoughts for us?
I stress my parents out, that's for sure.
Okay, they're gonna...
I am in the sexuality education business, and what that really means is that I'm trying to bring comprehensive intersectional sexuality education, mainly to young people, but I am doing a lot of work in adult spaces and helping people to exercise their bodily autonomy, understand how their body works, how to listen to their body, and to really liberate themselves from a lot of the restrictions in place that have politicized what it means to live in our authentic selves and our identities, and to exercise body agency. So that's, I guess, the big summary. With kids, it looks like a lot of different things beyond a condom and banana situation, because I do a lot of work with elementary students.
Okay.
And it's a lot about private parts are privates, using anatomical terms to refer to your body parts and not nicknames, so that the shame is not present, and letting them know that their body bubble or body boundary is something that is theirs, that they have ownership over, and therefore understanding consent outside of a sexual context is something I want to be well exercised in them. And as they move on through, their years in schooling, I want them to understand what healthy friendships and relationships look like, so that they can exercise high levels of scrutiny at determining whether or not they're being treated humanely, but also in safe ways to really have a life that is full of safety, fulfillment, and pleasure. So as their intimate lives might grow in stakes, they are able to make decisions that are in service of safety, fulfillment, and pleasure. So that is what I do, but it is often misconstrued for being pro-intercourse, pro-pornography, liberal thought that isn't actually safe and good for our kids. And as recent media has called it, very much that I am grooming children to sexualize them, when in fact I'm protecting them from groomers who want to take advantage of their vulnerability. Right.
So there's a lot of collaboration with what you just said with what we do here in church. And I know that you've been an OWL instructor, our Whole Lives program that many of our friends here have taught in that program, trying to help our children do all those things. In fact, I grew up in About Your Sexuality in a Unitarian church when I was a child and had all the early renditions of some of that work. So tell us more about how you got into this. I know you were a teacher in Texas and you had some experiences that led to would you call it an awakening in who you wanted to be, or how would you describe this?
I don't know if I'd call it an awakening. I think it was a culture shock, which maybe led to an awakening, but I had started in a teaching program that had me in Houston, Texas for 6 weeks. And in the school that I was placed at, it was a Title I school where more than 50% of the students were on free or reduced lunch. And I had 24 students in my 8th grade math class, and 2 of them were already parents, 2 of them were pregnant at the time I was teaching them, and 1 of them was gone for 2 out of the 6 weeks I was teaching. And even though there's a lot that we can unpack with different public health cases there, and how do you get an 8th grader to already be in that position and how that impacts their academic achievement, I'll focus on the culture shock being the student that was gone for 2 straight weeks. Her name is Maria, and she was gone for 2 straight weeks without telling me why. When she returned, I had asked her if she was okay, where had she been, and she said she was really sick. And so I asked her what happened, and she says, well, I was bleeding a lot. And I said, oh my goodness, like where? And she goes, well, down there, miss. And so I'm thinking of, external trauma of some sort. But after probing a little bit more, she had basically tried to describe menstruation to me, but didn't have vocabulary for that. And I said, I think you're describing a period. When did this start? And she said, when I was in 6th grade. And I said, and no one's talked to you about this before? She goes, no, but it happens every month, and my stomach hurts so badly, so I just don't come to school.
Right.
So she's in 8th grade, but she's 15 years old. And she has already failed 8th grade at least once. And that's why she was in the summer program with me. And so, in doing some of that math, I had realized that she was really just missing half the school year since she had her period. Probably has endometriosis, but, did not have the language to really communicate what her needs were. And nobody was teaching her this. So on the lunch break, I went to the principal's office and told her what was happening with this student. And she knew about this. She says, yeah, I know, she's absent all the time. I said, do you know why? She said, no. I said, because she's on her period. Is there no puberty class at this public school? She says, well, Texas is an abstinence-only state, and I said, abstinence-only doesn't mean no science can't be taught. She's like, well, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And I said, you have an 8th grader coming to school for half the year because of something that is normal in her body. This cannot be how you want to matriculate her, if you even can, because she's not even coming to school. And so I asked if I could teach 2 sex ed classes in my last week there. And she said, okay, but you can't say the words homosexuality, abortion, or contraception. And I said, that's okay, I got a thesaurus. We'll make it work.
Yeah.
So I taught sex ed for 2 days with my 8th grade math students after they'd already taken their state exam, and did some financial literacy with, different things around like family planning and financial literacy. We talked about statistics and like STI rates and pregnancy rates and things like that. So I tried to do some math and some sex ed, and they were so captivated learning math while learning about their body. And that was so empowering for them. And that's when the seed was planted that I think I want to go into health education after my teaching program is done as a math teacher.
Right. So I always think of teachers as courageous. I was also a teacher in a high school program with difficult kids. We had 6 kids and 2 teachers. These were teenagers on their last leg. And it was a whole host of other kinds of sexuality issues, some uninformed issues,
Right.
some agency issues, a lot of power issues, a lot of abuse issues.
Right.
And I just think, and that was in the state of Vermont where they had more resources.
Yeah.
But I always think, like, no matter what we do, we can't do more. we can't just go at the sort of the base level and just give people a little bit of information. This has to be primary in
Right.
people's educations, right?
It needs to be standardized in every school from the womb to the tomb is how I like to talk about sexuality education, because otherwise you're reacting to something that's already happened. And especially when it comes to sexuality topics, you're usually reacting in the context of violence and tragedy.
Yeah.
And when sexuality is meant to be something liberating and beautiful, why are we introducing it to young people in the aftermath of a Me Too story?
So let's talk about intersectionality, because I think I use that word occasionally, and I see a lot of blank stares when I started talking about that. So you've sort of given us the ground floor here on some of this, but you're touching on the intersections of other issues,
Right.
Poverty issues, all kinds. Talk about just what is intersexuality from your point of view, 101. How does it cross over into issues of race and power and all? Talk to us about this.
Sure. Well, without being too reductive with Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality, the way I teach it with even our elementary age students is that we all have different identities. And these different identities, especially in the United States, makes us experience life differently as a result. And so with like middle school, student, I would say that these identities make it that the way you experience health is going to be different than the kid next to you. And with a high school student, it would sound like based on those identities, you're not going to be afforded the same human right that health is because of a marginalization that you have. And that certain combination might be very different than somebody else's. And it shouldn't be so unequal, but that's the world we live in. So even though we can learn about what health is and how to obtain it, it doesn't mean we're going to have equal experiences around it. And that's a sad reality because health is a human right, and yet we're not all experiencing that. And that is as a result of being in a white supremacist-run world that prioritizes and privileges people of certain identities. So when we're talking about sexuality education, it can't just be, well, use a condom. Well, what if they don't have access to that based on where they're located in their neighborhood, or they are in a community where they'll ask for a prescription or judge you for, accessing birth control, and so they won't afford you that right. Or you're in a culture that doesn't want to promote premarital sex, then you should use a condom, but then you can't use a condom. So what's the point of me teaching it, right? So the way that I'll teach it is through this activist lens of what are the barriers and the systemic oppressions that are making it difficult for this person to get a condom versus this person. We could do the same thing with sexual orientation, with gender identity. You could know the definition of what a transgender person is, but you may not be able to live authentically as one based on a certain either identity you have. And I feel like I would just tease students with all this new vocabulary without them being able to actually explore it freely because of those systemic barriers. So adding that extra layer allows them to see the realities of the world that they're in, to get riled up enough about it to then do something about breaking down those barriers.
Right, so when the governor of Texas says we're just going to get rid of all rapists, he's actually expressing a kind of white supremacy point of view, which is, it's only, these problems only happen to certain kinds of people in certain
Right.
kinds of situations.
Right.
Taking apart, talking about access to abortion now,
Right.
taking away the complications that are happening in all people's lives who need access.
Right.
And the other part of that, I guess, to ask you about is something I encounter a lot in the work I'm doing around this SB8 is trying to move people from choice to access and to the intersectional lens.
Right.
I saw that at the march yesterday
Yep.
a lot. There were a lot of signs, and it's not that one is better, one can't live without the other, but there are a lot of choice signs, like
Right.
my choice and all this stuff.
Right.
But the signs that were about, like, poor black women are going to die is moving the whole conversation through the racial equity lens
Yep.
and into an intersectional approach.
Right, right. Absolutely. I would add, like, in addition to race, is that not everyone who is trying to maybe access abortion rights is someone that identifies as a woman. So
Yes.
I did see one of my favorite signs, but I would make one edit to it. It said, Texas, where a virus has reproductive rights, but not a woman's body. And I would say a human being.
People's bodies,
right?
yeah.
Because we know there are trans men who need access to abortion. There are non-binary people that need access to abortion. And if you ban it, it doesn't mean that abortion is now not going to happen.
Right.
It's now just going to happen unsafely or, without the support that is needed.
But we're in a state that is so far from understanding that, not the people here, but the
course
people
not.
arguing the laws,
Right.
to the fact that
Right.
we had to fight 5 or 6 anti-trans laws in addition to these other issues.
Right.
So the challenges are great.
Definitely,
is what we're talking about. Our church is where the Roe v. Wade case was founded. We're finding ourselves in the middle of some of the activity around SB8. And I see this work not just as a sort of mandate of my faith, but also as deeply a justice issue. And there's a question, I think, on your website about connecting social justice with comprehensive sexuality education. Take us another couple steps deeper. What do you mean when you talk about social justice and comprehensive sexuality, and how are you sort of fitting those pieces together essentially in your work?
When most people think of comprehensive sex ed, they're thinking about contraception and prevention of STI education. Beyond abstinence-only education, which has just been, you don't engage in any of this, and that's sex ed. I like to push it a little bit further and talk about the intersectional approach, which is under the social justice realm, and recognizing that if you can have sex ed that is comprehensively done, that is inclusive of so many different identities, then you're doing it right. There are a lot of white feminists that are out there that are leaving out the intersectional approach of Black queer women, of people who have a uterus and don't identify as women, right? We can't just fight for one identity and their rights to equal pay and think that, great, now we've all reached equity. We have to look at all of the different marginalizations. And so in making sure that we're, again, including all of the other aspects of why sexuality cannot be something experienced safely for everyone means looking at body diversity. It's looking at not just race, but all genders. It's looking at all other identities that allow us to either experience or not experience it in a way that's safe, fulfilling, and pleasurable. We have to look at neurodivergence, socioeconomic status, orientation. So we can't just leave it out and think that we've checked off the box and now, great. There are so many people that aren't able to access it because of an identity that they have that many white feminists don't bring into their conversation, yet often have a platform to talk about.
And if we're going to make our world more just, we're going to need more examples. So you're in a state where we're pretty worn out. I mean, we're looking at what's happening here And it looks pretty grim, actually. I mean, it's very possible that these laws, especially around access to abortion, are not going to be overturned. It's possible that these trans laws they're trying to pass will just keep coming back and back and back. Right. What are examples of some hopeful examples that you see in the world where minds, bodies, lives are changing in sort of positive directions, sex positive directions, positive in your perspective?
I have two observations that I've made recently, and it's that specifically to Texas, what I know to be true is that I think Texas gets a bad rap because when people talk about reproductive rights, they think everyone in Texas is anti-choice. And I know in the 48 hours I've been here, that is not the case.
Right.
But you have the loud voice of a minority that gets the platforms to then speak on behalf of the whole state. Yeah. And so outside of Texas, people all think, oh, the whole state is, believes this one thing. And I think that's really unfair. And I think that's a disservice to the people who are fighting for reproductive freedom. The march that I did see, I mean, there are hundreds of people that feel very differently than how Texas is perceived. Yeah. And that is very much a microcosm of many other issues around social justice where you have powerful minority voices that are somehow representing all of America when we all don't feel that way. So I think it's important to know that a lot of times the media will project an opinion, but it's very much who had the power to get that voice in media. They don't represent everyone. And we know that from sexuality statistics. Most families in America, we're at 80% want comprehensive sexuality education. And they believe in this type of progressive ed, but it wouldn't seem that way based on who gets to speak.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I would say social media. I think this is a very useful tool, especially for young people, to get information and from voices that they normally wouldn't hear because the other voices might be louder, but they have this ability to curate a playlist or a following of people that align with their specific values or that they can learn from. And if they feel oppressed by one, they just unfollow or they mute that. And so they can really now create their ideal world almost and still get accurate information. And inspiration and visibility, which brings empowerment. So I think there's a really, social media can be a very powerful tool for getting the voice out, especially ones that normally don't get that platform.
Yeah, I absolutely have seen that we have a lot of transgendered people in our church, many youth, and many of them found their way to understanding themselves through the social media, even with a congregation that was really supporting them.
Right.
And I've met families from places in East Texas who have a transgender child who they have no resources, and the only life-saving, rope is to videos they can watch by people who are testifying about who they are.
Representation really does matter. And as an Asian American woman looking at Hollywood films, I rarely see women that look like me who are being depicted in a positive way that makes me feel, I feel good about myself. And so the same goes for other identities that normally don't get that platform. Now they can really see a lot of people who share that identity. And they can feel really seen because they are seen and they have this outlet now that is just at the convenience of their fingertips so that they can be reached all the way in East Texas.
Yeah, and if you don't have access to that, or if you're just us here in Dallas, you think the world around us is becoming this new puritanical era. What kind of forces are working against the new puritanical era in your life, or for what are you seeing out there? I mean, are we in a moment where some of these things are shifting far to the right, and what do we do about it?
I hate that sexuality has been so politicized. I mean, I want to believe that everyone wants to be safe, wants to experience pleasure and enjoyment and fun, and wants to feel fulfilled in who they are. And yet those simple three things have been put as too progressive, liberal, and therefore left. Why, right? I mean, these are things that we should all want for our children, for ourselves. And yet we have these patriarchal, white supremacist forces defining for us what success or what beautiful or what right is, even if it does not serve our health and well-being. And so that tells me that their goals are power, even if it means at the cost of people's lives. And so I think, we need to be less divisive and just zoom out and see we actually have a lot in common. Why are we choosing to make this a political debate? We just want people to exercise bodily autonomy. Let them live their life, but we're turning that into blue and red.
Yeah, it sounds easy to us because we agree on this, but I think actually a lot of this comes from our deep American roots in Calvinism. I've been preaching about this for about 4 weeks now, and how this sort of denial of the body was almost a fundamental course in American religion. And knowing that religion isn't the only problem, because I hope our version of religion is also part of the solution. But
right.
What kinds of things, before we take some questions, what kinds of things are just hopeful for you? What keeps you just going? Because,
special shout
you're
out.
keeping us going, but what keeps you going?
Oh, well, I do want to give a shout out to Sherry Cook and starting WISE, because I am a huge fan of the OWL curriculum. When I was studying for my public health degree at Columbia, we studied the Our Whole Lives curriculum because it's really the only medically accurate faith-based sex ed curriculum. There are many other, medically accurate sex ed curricula that's out there, but they're not faith-based. And so I was always happy to be able to lean on OWL to more conservative groups that were, religiously rooted to say, actually, there is a faith-based curriculum and you should refer to this, because they really focus on safety, fulfillment, and pleasure. So I'm just so glad that, her organization started to make OWL more accessible to people, because I think there's a lot of hope in being able to frame it in that approach through that faith-based lens. So that's really hopeful, I think, for the movement. For me, seeing my youth feel empowered in ways that I was never afforded as a young person. When they, reach out to me with something I haven't even learned about, or a new term that, I said, oh, I've never heard of that. I should start teaching that. Where did you learn that from? Tell me more, about it. And they're feeling more able to be their authentic self. Like, we're going through so much in high school on, puberty, acceptance, but lack of belonging, and, having the right tools and visibility, especially in like social media, for them to feel brave enough to tell an adult, I know who I am, is a very powerful thing for a 16-year-old to realize about themselves, as opposed to waiting until college, waiting until maybe they're even 30 to figure out, I'm still, I don't know who I am yet. Having that head start because of what they're accessing now. Yeah. I just have so much faith in Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So we're going to take some questions, but if you wanted to ask a question, you have to move to that microphone here. So you're going to start standing up and walking over to that microphone. But before we do that, give us one new term that you learned that we can learn, because...
Sure. Well, I actually heard this one 4 years ago, but I'm hearing it more now in like Cosmo magazine and whatnot. But the term demisexual was on the newer, side of like the spectrum of people understanding like sexual orientation and attraction. And really the concept is that you are attracted to a person's personality and behavior, not what their gender identity is. And so it's that, I have a crush on this human, not, well, if this human identifies as a woman, then therefore I'm lesbian, or therefore I'm, gay, or whatever it is. It's, I am attracted to this person. And so it's very individual, and it's now its own category that, people are saying, this is who I am, this is what I am. And It was a sophomore at the time, maybe it was 7 years ago, who told me this word, and I was like, oh, I need to look that up and learn more about it. And now I'm seeing it almost in people's like vernacular now.
Interesting.
So she was definitely ahead of it.
Okay, good. So demisexual, now we are all educated on that. Question, yes. Come on down to the microphone. That microphone's on. Get as close as you can to it. And
I'll
let's
just
ask.
take the mask off to ask
Yeah,
the
that's
question.
fine.
So, how are you delivering the information? Are you in the school systems, or are you in the community where it's after school groups, or how is that actually working on the ground?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I am usually in the school system. So I have done some work, I think, with some like small organizations, after school programs, but I was in a K through 12 private school for 9 full years as their director of health and wellness in New York City. And so I was delivering on campus during their either homeroom or during their actual health class period time, either once a week or for one semester, and they're getting health education directly from me. I had a department of 3 other teachers who were health educators delivering it to other grades, since there's so many sections and so many students. So like a math class, they had health class, and in health class, there's a unit on sexuality. The other units are mental health literacy, nutrition and food relationships, and community healing. So really through the schools, as if it was another subject, but usually pass-fail.
Very good. Come on down. And if we could get any next question over there, that would be great. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you both for being here and doing this tonight. And I just want to give a shout out to the church. So I am Sherry Cook, and thanks to the church, we have Wise in the community. This has been many years in the making, and the fact that we're out in the community now is all thanks to the support of this place, which is, I don't know what we would do without it. So I'm kind of curious what you would suggest for those of us in Texas and how we might reach more young people with sexuality education.
It's a good question. I think social media needs to be a part of that answer. And I know that there are independent schools that want to do more than what the, I guess, public school standards look like, which may not still include comprehensive sex ed. So I think there are definitely pockets of progressive communities that want more than what their child is getting. And I think it's leaning on those. I think social media is a great way to mobilize young people to be able to demand more of what they want. And even in public schools, despite it still being an abstinence-only state, I think there's enough interest and power in student clubs even to want to speak up and demand more from their teachers and their schools to be bringing the things that are really relevant for them and what they need to know. My fear is that there's going to be so many negative health outcomes as a result of a lack of access, for sure, but even just a lack of education, that we'll have to wait till all of these negative things happen for then people to say, oh, maybe we should now teach this thing. And again, it's waiting until something bad has already happened, which is not uncommon for public health, because when public health works, it means that nothing bad has happened. We've prevented it. And that's a really hard sell, especially when it comes to funding, grants, where we're saying, well, no, we did well when nothing bad happened. And they want to see like quantified like data of improvement, of growth, of enrichment. But I want to believe that when you prevent something and teach them the content so thoroughly, they're actually enriched to not just not get a disease or not get pregnant when they don't want to, but they actually have fulfilling, pleasurable, safe lives that allow them to, be their authentic self.
Of course, if the political strategy is to create enough crises in a state so that on the sort of scale of Maslow's hierarchy around these issues become so on the fringe of what we can do that it gets harder to do some of this work.
Yeah.
I don't know if you see a difference in states like where you're from in California or in New York where you live around this, but this state seems to have a political agenda around creating more crises so that we can't even get to what you're describing.
Right. I think working in small groups, I mean, I think this church is so incredible with how, you all work together, that maybe it's in this pocket where you continue to invite people into the safe, brave spaces to have those conversations where it is legal because you're your own private community. So I think extending that invitation where we're not all like that, it's safe here, can really kind of start that. I mean, if Roe v. Wade started out of here, I'm sure that,
There were some courageous women who started that conversation.
Right.
That's true. Very good. Yeah. Okay. Question.
I wanted to really have you peel back the onion more on the discussion of equity versus intersection, because we hear a lot about health equity, and particularly through my work, I'm seeing in different pockets of Dallas, not just sexuality education that they don't know, basic health education. So when you talk about a cardiologist, they have no idea what that is.
Right.
And we're building new facilities in South Dallas at Redbird Mall. And so, there are a lot of people who are ending up in an emergency room. They're getting healthcare, but they're not understanding what that is.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could talk more about equity and intersection.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Health literacy is something that is such a life skill and not taught, not talked about enough. And we are matriculating children out of the school systems being so ill-informed as to how to access healthcare, what they can do about their bodies. In the same way, we're not preparing them financially too. There's no financial literacy classes in most schools. There's no health literacy classes in most schools. You have kids that are going to college and wait, now I have to be an independent adult. I don't know how to adult. And then they actually become an adult and they're totally lost. So I definitely resonate with that need. And I think the problem is when people think of schools, they're thinking about academic achievement. They're thinking about getting into college. They're thinking about SAT scores, ACT scores, taking a test after you've studied and then seeing if your metric of knowledge has grown. Fine, but if you are a student that has an ear infection while you're taking this test, automatically you're gonna have a harder time, right? And so we're not even giving them the language to understand what's happening to their body and how that impacts their learning. And so I'm always talking to schools who are trying to do more health education. A healthy student, which means a health literate student, is actually going to be a stronger learner. So if you want those graduation numbers to increase, you need to make sure your students are healthy to begin with. But we have health disparities and systemic, barriers that are preventing them from accessing healthcare, understanding healthcare, and therefore they're walking into science class not feeling well, but not knowing why. The other component that I left out in my Houston class was I had 2 Hurricane Katrina displacements. They were asleep most of my class time, right? And then I had a quarter of my students who were Bloods, a quarter who were Crips, a quarter La Primera, and a quarter Southwest Cholos. So, there's now gang involvements, there's unplanned pregnancies, there's teenage pregnancy, and there's hurricane displacements. This is all happening, and they're supposed to learn ratios and proportions today on a Tuesday morning. They're dealing with so many other things, right? And the school's just focused on this Texas state exam. We need them to know how to do decimals by the end of this week so that we can just graduate them and move them on and they're no longer our problem. So we're not looking at schools in the broad enough way of who we are trying to raise. Are we raising calculators? Or are we raising human beings to be self-sufficient, to be global citizens, to be literate about how to not just help themselves, but help the people around them? So I think we need a reckoning in American school and education on what does school really mean, and how can we make it so that we're really raising young people to be adults who can adult.
Yes.
Here for that. Really quick question, and this is just, are there other states where you're doing your work that have actually made the transition in health policy to be what you're describing?
So I'm most familiar with health policies around schools and health. So I'll speak what I know about New York and California, and through the lens of school-based health centers. These are very progressive initiatives that I studied a lot in public health school because my hope was to become a school-based health center director. And basically what it is, it's a fully fledged health clinic on sites of a school campus. So think of the school nurse's office, but with doctors, with health educators, with therapists. Some have dental, some have optometry. So it's like a full clinic, but it's in the same building as the high school or the same campus as the high school. So why is this beneficial? Because there's an increase in, or there's an increase in emergency care usage when they are only accessing healthcare that way, when they don't know that prevention care, having a primary care physician is something they should regularly go to for a physical and whatnot. Now they can just access it. It's right next to, the principal's office or next to their math class, so that students aren't having to rely on, emergency care usage for their regular healthcare, or they're not waiting until it's ER necessary. They're preventing this stuff. So when New York and California started to implement or apply a lot of school-based health centers in their school campuses, there was a drastic decrease in unplanned pregnancy, STIs, because you can get an IUD by the end of the school day if that's what you wanted. And in New York City, if you're over the age of 12, you don't need parental consent to access contraception. And so there you also have, access to it because of a reproductive right for adolescents. Most people are very shocked by how low that number is, but many people forget that not every child is having sex because they want to. And especially in states like New York, like Hawaii, where there is high sex trafficking, right? We need to protect the most vulnerable. And if that means there's a 13-year-old young person who's being trafficked, or they are, being sexually abused within their own family, they're not going to be able to ask their parent, "Hey, can I get on the pill because of uncle, right? Or because of, where you've pimped me out to, right?" So we want to take into account all of the different types of adolescents that we are serving, and that includes the most marginalized. So these school-based health centers are present to make sure that they have easy access and free of insurance if you don't have any, confidential from parents because it falls under the health policies as legal. And we just saw healthier students. Absenteeism went down because they are healthier. Therefore, they're showing up to their classes more regularly. They don't have to rely on their parent to leave work, come pick them up to go in the middle of their doctor's appointment, especially if they have a chronic illness, right? So that was a very clear example of bringing health, making it truly equitable, and giving it to spaces of schools that are like Title I schools. And we saw drastic public health outcomes move in the positive direction, where therefore their academic achievement also increased. So there are states, I'm most familiar, like I said, with California and New York that are implementing it. But I mean, if I were to try to pitch a school-based health center knowing that a 14-year-old girl could get an IUD by the end of, fourth period class, I'm sure there would be riots on the street here.
Yes.
But in New York and California, it is a reality, and it's something that is a very empowering tool that is making a huge difference in students to actually be students and to be healthier.
Well, that's a vision that we can hold on to. Is there just a strange mind-body division in America? I mean, isn't that what we're sort of talking about in all these aspects?
Yeah.
When you think about that, where do you think that where do you see the roots of that? I know where I see them, and I see them in religion, but I'm a theologian, so.
Sure. I mean, I think it does come a lot from religion as well. I think I say it all the time. we need to smash the patriarchy. Everything to me stems to patriarchy and that power and how we're reduced to our reproductive biology to then dictate what type of life we can live. And, when, it was learned that, people that have a uterus can bring life into the world, what does that mean for the humans that cannot? Well, let me try to take away and control their bodies so that I can feel a sense of power and they have to do what I say when I want them to, kind of thing. And, we've seen that explode in so many different iterations.
Yeah.
But I really think that it comes from people having so much shame around understanding how their body works, and it being so triggering to talk about their body because it's not something we've normalized. The shame is so deep. There's so much violence and trauma for a lot of people around these things. And I know this because of a recent smear campaign that I was in this past summer. Unfortunately, I received a lot of hate mail, including death threats from people about the work that I do, and especially with young people. And what was really clear to me is that unlike many other topics, sexuality hits differently. And so I would get an email from someone that had said, I think I remember this one verbatim, your mother should have aborted you, and if you step foot in my country, I'll shoot you myself. Right after that, the next random email I got was, I'm a mother of 3, and I was molested by my uncle for 11 years. And reading your article in the New York Times gave me so much hope that one day my children may get an education that will allow them to assert themselves and not be vulnerable in the way I was. Thank you for doing such incredible life-saving work. And I was thinking wow, these are 2 very different emails, but the common denominator is that it all stems from sexual trauma or sexual violence or so much shame. But one person is healing and the other person might not even know that they've been traumatized or hurt. So they associate everything with it with bad. And therefore, anyone that's doing that work is bad to the point where they want me dead. It's that deep in them that they're this is so offensive to me that this person shouldn't even live anymore. Now, my joke in my head when I was reading that first email, the death threat, was well, at least this person's pro-choice.
Yeah, right.
But, jokes aside, I mean, it clearly triggered people in very different ways. And it allowed me to be a lot more compassionate.
Yeah.
Because when I got all of this, vitriol in my email inbox, I couldn't feel anything but feel sorry for the people who are in so much pain, that they are projecting their own traumas, unresolved traumas, on a complete stranger who's actually doing life-saving work in the way that mother had, referenced. But they're so far from even wanting to be healed. And it just fortified why I do what I do. And so, if anything, the emails have just added fuel to my fire and passion to wanting to make sure this gets out, because people are so repressed. And we need to make sure we get more sexually educated.
Yeah. I'm sorry that you've had that. I've had my own versions of those in the last few weeks.
I bet.
And my response to a lot of those were that they come from fear. That we are such a fearful species, and that we express that in different ways. And of course, I was getting the hell and damnation versions of what you were getting.
Sure.
And it did also make me think 2 things. One was that we are speaking completely different languages. And secondly, that it did increase my compassion for people who lived in a deep fear of their own bodies, their religion, their God, their lives. And the only outlet was to express it onto other people,
right.
Which is kind of what we saw yesterday at the march downtown with people on megaphones telling us we were all going to hell
Right,
and these
right.
kinds of just bad theologies that don't, don't make the world more whole and healthy.
Right.
So thank you for being here. We're so glad that you're here. You're going to be here also Tuesday night. We're saying if you want more sex, come on Tuesday night. And
Double pun intended.
we've got a partnership with White Rock Montessori School through WISE, and there's going to be a large contingent of parents, and you're invited back to come, and we hear more from you about this.
Can I give a preview as to what I'm telling the parents on Tuesday?
Oh, I have no idea what you're I hope you're going to tell them a lot of what we talked about tonight.
A little bit. There's a little overlap. Tuesday, I'm going to be speaking with parents, mainly of middle school ages, about pornography literacy, basically. So it's about sexually explicit media and how it is really becoming the main sex education tool for our young people. And that's why we need to get in there to make sure they are literate about what they are inevitably going to be exposed to so that they can actually dissect, is what I'm seeing in service of my safety, my fulfillment, my pleasure, all three of those things? Or does it actually make me feel worse about my body or make me anxious to interact with other people? Or am I just learning about my body through what I'm seeing on the screen? And this is something that's really pervasive in a lot of, especially middle school spaces. And many parents are convinced that not my child, and it is almost exactly that child when that is the reaction. And so I'll be speaking on Tuesday on giving parents a lot of tools on how to have those conversations. Keyword being conversations, because it should be 100 one-minute talks and not one 100-minute talk or the sex talk. So ways to, make an everyday conversation a sex ed one with, talking about media, talking also about sexting and sextortion, especially for middle school students who feel that, if they don't have that follower or they didn't send it to anyone else but that one person, that they must be safe. And so it's a lot about technology, sexuality, and safety, but then also making sense of their pubescent bodies in a way that is empowering as opposed to, why doesn't it look like the ones that I'm seeing on the screen? So hope you can come to that as well. It'll also be recorded if you can't.
And there have been some good television shows. I think we could talk more about what do you think about the show Sex Education
I love
and some
that
other
show, Sex
shows.
Education.
So I hope our children are also kind of learning there.
Yeah.
But we're so glad to have you, Justine Infante. Thank you for being
Thank
on
you,
the front
Daniel.
porch with us and here at First Unitarian Church.
Really has been an honor. Thank you.